Hello, Vanakkam, Leena Madimekale. Welcome to Film Companion South.
Vanakkam, Barry.
Yes, congratulations on your second feature, Madatti. ரெண்டு விஷயத்துக்கு congratulations. ஒன்று படத்துக்காகவே congratulations. Second வந்து ஒரு distribution platform கிடைச்சு you are trying to kind of do this on your own, and I think that's a really encouraging sign for independent filmmakers. Before we begin this program, a note to our viewers, as always, Deep Focus is a spoiler-filled show. So if you've not seen the movie, I would strongly advise you to watch it. It's a very good film. And அதுக்கப்புறம் இதை வந்து பாருங்க because we are going to be discussing certain things that you may not want to know. So spoiler alert over. Now, Leena, your film is about the section of Dalits called the Puthiravanna. They're the washer people community, and they are given the so-called unclean things to wash, like menstruated rags and things like that. In addition to this, there's another form of oppression, which is that they should remain out of sight of the people in the village. Now, first and most obvious question, you mentioned several times that you've listened to a lot of these stories when you were in your village. How did you come across the story of this community, that such a community even existed?
Yeah, I mean, I have read a novel called Koveru Kazhathaigal. It's a Sahitya Academy winning novel, which is written by Imayam. I read it as a work of fiction, but I came in contact with them physically. Like, I went to Tirunelveli and met the community. All that happened when I was in the middle of a documentary feature project called Rape Nation. While I'm reading a lot through this work, then I came across an article which said there is this community who are perpetually displacing because they are not able to protect their women. They are very, minimal because there are only one or two families. They get hired by their oppressor caste, like one family for 100 families. They are Dalits within Dalits. And they are given a certain place to live, and they are given a certain place to be buried, and that's how they exist. So they are very less in number. Some census says there are like 500,000, like around in 70s, but now they say in many of the research articles like there are 100,000 families, but nobody knows the exact number because we don't have census based on caste. So these people are invisibilized. They're almost not documented, though Dr. Ambedkar has spoken about them even before independence, exactly on Puthiravannas who lived in Tirunelveli district, who are considered seeables. Even the sight of them is considered pollution because they do this kind of forced occupation. They are scavengers. They are washing clothes of the dead and the menstruating people and the Dalits. He even says no civilization can be guilty of such greater cruelty. That's what he says. So, yeah, I mean, I was in Tirunelveli after my participation in one of the film festivals in Kerala. Then I met Master Chandru, like we call him as Ovir Chandru, Chandru Appa, because he's a very respected artist. And he put me on to this people, the community who live in Tirunelveli district, especially in the village of Vikramasinghapuram. And there is this Murthy Ayya, who is the first generation graduate from this community and who is now retired government official. So I got in touch with him, and he is the door for me. Like, this is the door. I gained access through him. His family became my extended family. I stayed with him, and he took me around villages in the whole of Tirunelveli district. I heard women from the community, men from the community, children of the community, old people of the community. In fact, Murthy Ayya's sister herself, she was killed by sexual violence, and the oppressor community have built a stone for her because they are so afraid of her rage. So they are actually worshipping her. So we see Madathis in every household there. And there are stories behind these Madathis. Like, there are so many versions. So all the stories I heard, all the people I met, and they are the fuel, and they are the ones. The stories I heard is what is being converted to Madathi, what you see.
You've heard a lot of these stories, and you are a documentary filmmaker as well. So you can make any story in any way, any material into any shape, right? What made you say that I want to tell this like a folklore? In fact, it is called an unfairy tale. So it's almost like a bit of a legend, kind of like a story. What made you say this is how I want to frame my story?
I somehow thought after the extensive interactions with the community that this whole concept of unseeability, where they have to exist but they can't be seen, there is a lot of mystery to it. Yes, of course, it's cruel, but there is this whole mystery to it. And this particular community, they are also believed to do this black magic, and they know medicine, and they are basically artists themselves. Like, they have the special powers. And there is this character Marden in the film, whom come across. He comes across as someone with special powers. So within the community, they are also called Rapadis, because Rapadis, night singers.
Yeah.
You come outside, come out during the night and you sing through the streets. And when there is something good or bad, they sing in their songs. They put in the songs, and they encrypt it in the songs, and they sing it. So though these people are considered unseeables, they live in Sudalai. The name of the man is Sudalai. Sudalai is what? Graveyard, crematoriums. That is where they live a lot. Their existence, like, it is either in the Pudaravannar bush, in the outskirts of village, where they are destined to live, or where they are forced to live. And because they are really important culturally to do all the rituals for the dead people, they are very closely connected to this crematoriums. And also their proximity to nature. The more they are alienated from the village, from the rest of the civilization, they are very close to nature. They live with animals, they live with birds. And though the economy is from the clothes they wash, they hunt animals, they hunt birds, and they hunt river creatures, and they eat it. And in civilization, you wouldn't have heard them eating certain birds and certain beings in forest, but they do it culturally, because that is what they are very close with. So, and also rivers and mountains and all this are very, they wear it like how they wear their dress. Like, they wear nature, like, they smell of rivers, they smell of, their harmony with nature is phenomenal.
Yeah.
And all this was contributing to my decision of telling this as a story. And I also come from Western Ghats. I was born on the slopes of Western Ghats. Like, my village is few kilometers from the village where I shot. In fact, the forest portions that come in the film, they are shot in my own forest, in my villages, because seeking permission from the forest where the stories were told, it was very difficult. So it was shot in my village. So I found very close to my heart of the stories I heard when I grew up from my mothers and grandmothers, because we too worship deities like Isaki, or Mariamman, Ranganaigamman, like all these deities whom you worship. They are not somebody who descended from the sky, or they are your own ancestors who had special stories, and they have memorialized these stories as something, the stories that should not be forgotten, the narratives that should not be forgotten. So they are the ones who are very close to you. Like, you don't go to these mainstream temples, big gods, the institutionalist gods. Like, for us, when the month starts, and when there is something good or bad happens in the family, we always go to this small gods, like deities or little gods, you can call. So all these are ancestors, and they are more pagan. They are even older than the civilization, even older than the religions we know of, the institutionalized religions we know of. So they are, I mean, for me, they are the icons of social order. They are the symbols of resistance. So there are stories. They are like, you know, memorialized stories, and they are our real histories. So somehow I thought, like, I will, you know, make this as a grandmother story, like how I heard from my mom and grandmom. Like, I wanted to, you know, really get into that folklore space. And like, you get to hear all these stories, and if it is told in the story format, then you know, it can retain that mystery and that whole essence and all that. The true essence, I thought, will come as fiction rather than documentary.
You just explained this, and the young girl through whose eyes, whose point of view we see the film, Yosana has her name in the film. You know, she's dressed in clothes that have nature patterns. She's always with animals. She's seen in water bodies. She's always surrounded by animals, like a little donkey, whatever it is. And then it's also that one of the most subversive symbols in your movie is that in one shot she has a parrot on her shoulder, and that is a symbol that you often see in dominant caste deities like Andal and Meenakshi and all those things.
See, Meenakshi Amman is again a tribal goddess, and she got Sanskritized as, you know, Meenakshi Amman as a mainstream goddess. And Andal is someone who's a very, you know, I come from Srivilliputur, and Andal is someone who was adopted as a child by the flower vendors. So she is someone who lived like one of us, and she got Sanskritized as somebody who was in love with Vishnu. So all these real women were Sanskritized, and now they are in the mainstream temples. They are totally institutionalized. This Yosana, she is she's a girl goddess, and why I really portrayed her as somebody who is part of that Western Ghats, who is like a plant you see, the flower, the wild flower you see, like, you know, you can't separate her from that. You know, she is one among that. Like, so I wanted to portray her like that because she's an embodiment of innocence. And when you're 13 and 14, like, you know, people keep saying like you're unseeable, you're this, you're that, but you're such a fresh flower blooming out of nowhere, and you have your desires, you have your, you know, lust for life, and you want to be free, and you want to, you know, explore this world, and you want to experience things that come on your way. That is the thing you have when you are 13 or 14. You know, that's what I remember. So I wanted to portray her and to see the entire world from her eyes, because she is the அவங்க தான் கடைசி மனுஷி. She's the last woman, because she is the girl who is born in the community. They are in the lowest in the ladder of caste system, and she is not even wanted by her own family, because most of the females born in Pudrevana community, they actually kill
them. There's actually a line in the movie like that.
So like female feticide and infanticide is huge in that community, because they are constantly afraid of protecting them, because caste-based sexual violence is so normalized. It is not at all about sexual urge or something. It is a mode of punishment, and it is a mode of showing your power. Like, that's how sexual violence, you know, is so normalized in the villages of Tamil Nadu. That's exactly I wanted to, you know, that is the point that drew me to this world, you know, that I wanted to understand and wanted to make it as a story, as a film. But and that is a core which I wanted to, you know, weave around. So caste-based sexual violence happening to a girl who is not even blooming, like she's there. And what happens to her when she refuses to be defined by her birth? When her mother says don't go, she wants to go because she wants to follow her intuitions, follow what her heart says. But if she does that, what happens is what I wanted to tell through Manu.
Right. Okay, I'm going to ask you about your first few frames. The images, actually, it's a newlywed couple on a moped or a scooter, I forget what. They're going towards the Madati temple. He's wearing a white shirt. But what you do is, instead of focusing on the couple themselves at first, you focus on their wealth. You focus on a ring.
The first scene, I just want, because the man who was wearing that ring, that has Madati Amman's
Symbol.
like, symbol. I wanted to portray like that. And the frame, the device which I'm using is the menstrual blood. Have you seen menstrual blood in the mainstream narratives? Have you seen have you ever come across a scene which discusses menstruations or puberty, or like and even spell out menstrual blood? It is such an unspoken thing. But like this whole community, especially the women of Padurai Vannas, are considered polluted and unclean because they wash menstrual clothes. So I'm also fixing the gaze from a female, from that 13-year-old, 14-year-old girl of this community. And also the narrative device I want to use is the menstrual blood itself, which is considered polluted, and which is unclean, and which should not be spoken in public.
Why did you want to punish the husband, so to speak, in the sense of, I'm just curious from a narrative point of view, because these people are coming long after the events of the story and they're going to the temple, but he almost becomes part of the history of Madati, the origin, that is Yosana Madati, because of why? What was your motivation in doing that?
See, Murthy Ayya's sister lived in 80s, like 60s to 80s. And now she's a deity there in Vikramasinghapuram. And she was killed because of sexual violence. Murthy Ayya lives in Vikramasinghapuram. And I stayed in their place for almost a year and a half, from research to execution of the film. And he lives in that cherry. There is only one house, and he has built it in concrete because he's the only one who got some government job, and he's living a decent life, and he's not doing this Padurai Vannar work. But his own brothers, his own family members, except his wife and two sons, who are now engineers, and one of the son is in US. The rest of the family members are still doing the same thing. And I will tell you one incident, like this is the third day, after I started living in the small room in the terrace. It's something which this person, this Murthy, earned out of his lifelong savings. So I was staying there and I walked with him. I was crossing that street where the Dalits live, and they are Dalits within Dalits. So I was actually crossing that street, and you should see Murthy Ayya. He is one of the village leaders. He acts in the film as one of the village leader. He didn't act as a Padurai Vannar. He comes as an oppressor in the film. So he always wears this white and white, like white shirt and white dhoti. When you look at him, like he's like 60 plus, and he's a retired government officer. Like he deserves respect. But the guys who he comes across when he walks to some shop, they call him by names, and they use da, and they use this swear words, and they call him out of disrespect, because I'm walking with him, like, who is this person from city who's staying with you? These kind of, they just call out. And the person who is doing, like, he's somebody who seems to be drunk and illiterate, and like he almost looks like an antisocial element. But just because he's born in a caste, that gives this entitlement for him to insult this person who is 60 plus and who is such educated person and who is retired as a government official, but still he has to undergo this ordeal every day. And you should see him like, like this, he was crossing the street till he, turned the street, he was doing this gesture. I got so angry. I said, like, என்னங்க ஏன் அப்பா இப்படி பண்றீங்க? I call him அப்பா. என்னங்க ஏன் இப்படி பண்றீங்க? So he said, like, if I bring these two hands down, I cannot exist in this village. Though, I mean, they say 30% of Pudraivanas are having access to education, because there are lots of other factors that is really hindering them to get all the benefits that the Dalits get, because they are having huge issues in getting their caste certificates, because they are landless people. There is no one document which says that they are owning a piece of land, and they also have to get validation from the very own people who are oppressing them, and they don't do it. They say, like, nee vandu en thuniya thopiya, nee vandu school ku poviya. So they are not very happy with them going to school. Instead of, with all these situations, Murthy fought his way, got his education and got his employment, and he's such a respected position in the society, but he has to undergo this humiliation every day. So though there is some change happening, without culturally they are still trapped in the life which is ripping off their dignity and respect and self-respect and decency, like, their humanity. Though the Marathi main narrative is set in 8, I mean, you can see, I didn't actually date the film because I didn't want to date it, because folklores are never dated.
Yeah.
When you read in books, they say, 1947 this happened. But when you hear stories from your mother or grandmother, they won't date it. Oru urla oru raja.
It's once upon a time, Mari. So,
So I wanted that, a quality to the film, so I didn't date it. But I do leave certain things in the film where you have the train, and where there is this radio blaring this song which comes which came in the film in those times. And I left few things, and there is this tractor during the village people meeting. So few things I left for people to pick up the time of the narrative, but I didn't say anything. But this happens in between 60s and 80s. But even now, their situation is not that much changed. Meaning, this newly wedded couple, in this recent times, they go to this temple, and they want to go to the temple before entering to the village, because they are, I mean, that's a practice kind of they follow. So I made this man become part of the painting and blind, to just tell the world that the caste system is, because the caste system still exists and the humiliation still exists. Maybe the forms have changed, the percentage have decreased, and all that is there, but the system still prevails. So that is what I wanted to say out of that, the man entering into the painting. So we are all part of that painting, because see, I never knew about this community, and that's how this caste system gives you a narrative which suppresses other narratives. And this whole ignorance makes you indirectly complicit to this cruel caste system. And I'm trying to question and challenge that ignorance and do my bit towards this annihilation of caste system. But cinema is just 100 years old, but religion is 10,000 years old, and caste is even older than that. And you are trying to address this kind of complex issue in the form of art. So all that will be there. And also I wanted to say that the films that come out claiming that they want to question caste system, they keep hypermasculinity as their answer to that. See, caste is a child of masculinity. Religion is a child of masculinity. Any system of exploitation, nation state, capitalism, wars, everything is a child of masculinity, especially hyper masculinity. So you cannot challenge caste system with your hyper masculinity, because that is causing the problem. So I am reversing that. I'm trying to, I don't know how successful I am, but as an author, I want to reverse that and say the camera is not a phallus, a camera is a womb. And and that is where I want to place my gaze and my storytelling.
But there is also this other logic, this commercial logic, if you will, and I'm putting that within quotes, that if you put a big hero in a movie and you kind of make a movie about caste, then more people watch the movie. Therefore, the message goes out to a bigger audience. What is your opinion about that logic?
See, when you cater something to market forces, then it is not art. You're doing some commodity. And when you're trying to suffice to the market demands, then you're buying into the systems of exploitation. Then see, if you have a hero vehicle and if you want to tell your story but still live up to the expectations that a hero vehicle film wants you to, then you just tell people that what you're doing. Don't claim that this is, we are marching towards annihilation of caste, because you are now being a part of a problem. Then you just make like I am telling a different story maybe, but I feel very cheated by these kind of narratives, because I have never seen anywhere hero-like figure killing people, bringing solutions. But you keep, planting that narratives, and you say that is the narratives of resistance that you want to say. But narratives of resistance cannot be hyper masculinity. Periyar says like aanmaya azhikkano, like masculinity is what you have to address. And you keep, because it is a superhero, because it involves like 100 crores of market, you're somewhere giving me a very false hope. And there was this political leader who comes from the Dalit political space, and he speaks in a public meeting, and he says like, we are not Rajinikanth or we are not Dhanush. We are living in this real life, and don't think that you can take law in your hand and weapons in your hand, and we have to inhabit, and we have to fight it politically. And this is not the civil way to address this. So yeah, and it is problematic. It is really problematic. As I said, like this is like 10,000 years ago, and this evil still continues. So what does an artist do? An artist, as an artist, I want to be in solidarity with these people. I want to be there, and I want to tell them like, I hear you, I see you, I understand you, or I try to understand you. And I want your stories to be, that's a story we are constantly erasing, we are suppressing, and we are not letting the people in the world know. So I want to like share it from your own perspective, and how you want to tell your story. I want to be there and collaborate with you and say that.
Sure, but just let me ask you the other way. I mean, you spoke of Rajnikant and Dhanush, right? Because they are the center figures. When you're making a female gaze narrative, would it help, again, talking to the market forces, would it help if you got a top ranking heroine, provided, of course, they fit the part and all that, and they can act and do all those things that you want them to do? Or do you prefer to work with unknowns because they come across as natural, and you're not, I mean, the art is more important to you than the reach? I mean, how does it work?
It really helps to have someone known face, because I also love to work with actors. I'm not anywhere. I'm not against actors, but I just want them to, for example, Semmeler, who did Veni, or Ajmina, who did Yosana. Both the actors are not from the community. Though the ensemble of cast is from the community and it is a people participatory film, few main characters I utilized actors, but they were willing to because we almost rehearsed 3 times. All the scenes I rehearsed, and we were staying with the community, and they were cooking and feeding us. And and Ajmina doesn't know Tamil, and she doesn't know how to swim, but your character is always in the river falls and in the lakes. And Semmeler is not from that community, and the way you wash the clothes and the way you walk and everything is it is generations of occupational body language that
Even the dialect is so different.
and
Yeah.
I use Sing Sound for that. So the dialogue training, mise-en-scene rehearsals, and on-camera rehearsals. We had like series of workshops before actually shooting, because we have a very small budget. Like I shot the entire film in 23 days. So for that, we need to actually, and also 90% of the cast, they have never acted or they've never been before the lenses. So, and also like though I wrote it, the first draft I wrote it, and then I had co-writers Yavanika and Rafiq writing the screenplay together, but the draft was open. The draft in the rehearsals was read by each and every person who participated in the film, and it was constantly improvised by the community, by people participating in the film. And that's how I keep saying, like, process is very important for me, because it is not something you sit in the room and create. It is something like you are there trying to feel the skin of the other, the community whose stories you want to say. So do we have any actors who can give that kind of time and dedication to me? Because again, when you're like a community, like a family, you're living together and making this film possible, it just like it's not like you can do this job and this person is doing this job and that person is doing that job. We can't have that kind of clear boundaries. Everybody is doing everything, and that's how the film was made. It is just not made by Leena Manimek. Like, it is made by this 20 to 30 crew members who actually dedicated into the realization of the film, and also each and every village people from the community who were part and parcel of the entire production and the creative process.
I'd like you to explain to me the film's tagline, which is "Nobody's do not have gods, they are gods."
Baddy, tell me, who are gods? Gods, for me, they are the icons of our collective guilt. We make gods because we don't know what to do with the guilt we have. So that's how I see gods. They are there because you have done something, and you want this stone therapist where you can go and confess yourself, and have this person whom you can confide your sins, and whom you think can relieve you out of the guilt. And it's always good to have someone who you don't touch or feel, or that person is not live, but there is someone whom you want to believe that they will help you in the times of disillusionment. And you have this moments in your life, where you want something which is out of your like you can't control that. So something you create to help your existence. That's how I see gods. I am not a believer. I'm an atheist, and for me, gods is a very amusing idea for me as a concept. This, who are these gods? Like, you see yourself in all these creating gods, but with nobodies, this Pudraivannas, they're outcast. And this Hinduism, this institutionalist religion, has kept them outside the caste. And they are not even untouchable, they are unseeables because
Right.
they wash clothes of Dalits. So they're nobodies. You don't see them in the map. You don't see them in the government ledgers. They are invisibilized, completely invisibilized. They are unseen, but still they exist. They are invisible labor, and they keep cleaning this world, this universe, but they are unclean. So this nobody, the nobodies, they don't have, like, they can't have a temple of their own. They can only have something drawn in their walls, or they can have the stones as their gods. But they can't. They. I mean, in the film, you can see, like, you see the family in front of the temple, and they don't even worry about the girl who is dead, but they keep asking, like, why are you here?
Yeah.
So this whole, because they are nobodies, and for them, and that nobody becomes a god. That's exactly what I'm questioning, the whole idea of God. Who is God? And here, the person whom you constantly said you're a nobody becomes your God because you want to save yourselves from what you did, from the cruelty you did, from your own sin.
Yeah. The exact word that you use, guilt.
Yeah, and I mean, sin is also again a religious word. I don't want to use it, but still, that is what many people get. So sin and holy and all these things are coming out of religious texts. So that guilt, what they did, so they want to protect themselves from the wrath of the person whom they are wronged.
One very interesting sub layer of this film is the constant presence of sex. Whether it is Yosana's mother, being awakened by the father and said, let's go outside and have sex, or whether it's the oppressor wanting to rape, or this man saying that he thinks of the landlord's wife, or I forget exactly who, but and then he gets turned on. There is always talk, and the most interesting part is because Yosana herself is entering puberty. When she looks at the naked man, she herself is a little fascinated, by the fact that such a thing exists, and she's probably it's probably the first time she's seeing a man fully naked or something like that. So you've decided what the film is about. What made you say, I want this extra layer underneath the main oppression topic?
The primal emotions is what I wanted to bring into the film. Like, people say kadal. What do you mean by kadal? Kadal, like, it's desire. It's a primal desire, primal emotion you have, like, something you feel for opposite gender or the same gender or your own sexuality is a primal emotion, and this whole emotions of rage and revenge and lust, and I think these are the primal thing. And in human civilization, they give other names and they want to sugarcoat it. But the more you go close to nature, the more you go to the subaltern communities, what you get is, like, they are close to their primal emotions. And especially with Yosana falling in love, it's not, it's her sexuality is awakened because she's looking at a male body for the first time. Have you ever seen any Tamil film in which a male nudity is
No,
shown?
this is the first. Yeah.
In
Full frontal
Sengal,
male nudity.
in
Yeah.
Sengal also there is nudity,
Yeah.
but here, I mean, female desire is something which nobody talks about. Like, desire is within the females. Like, it doesn't come from outside, but nobody talks about it. And this is exactly what everybody wants to suppress. And this is like always hush hush. But for me, the very crucial moment in the whole film is that primal desire what the girl gets, and it is her first awakening of sexuality. And about the language used, I mean, we always look at films where the language is sanitized.
Yeah.
You put some phenyl and, there
Yeah.
is this like mori, cinema mori, they say. I don't know what that means. So language is as much important as landscape, as much important as your own characters of stories, like how the mountains and the rivers and the wind and the light and the settings and the geography, like all these are important. The language is a very unit, because language is what your memory and your culture and everything is, encoded in language.
Right.
Especially the language we speak. Like ninga oru tea kadaikku ponina, I go to a tea shop, they in 10 minutes you will hear like some 10 swear words, and all those swear words are like insulting women. So the rape culture, the culture of sexual violence is so ingrained in the language. Language is so important, like, what you speak is what you are. So I wanted that to be exactly the way how, it is spoken among the community. And that is how it's been portrayed in the film. And that also, when censorship, when CBFC had issues with the film and they said your language is profane and you're showing a minor girl who's getting infatuated and you're offending Hinduism sentiments and all that, the reasons what CBFC, the regional office, told me, I told them, like, this is, I exactly want this language to be portrayed in the film, because that is where the violence is hiding. You speak your everyday language is hiding the violence you have, and it has to be portrayed the way it is. And minor girl, I told them, like, when I was 13 I was infatuated, and don't tell me that, you don't you don't have an awakening when you're in the age of 13 or 14. So those were the things I fought with the CBFC and then the tribunal, and I got the film without a single cut. Because
Fantastic.
yeah, we should know that we are constitutionally protected by, we have this full freedom of expression, and article 19A, like, reassures your freedom of expression, and you have to know your constitutional rights. So in tribunal I fought this for the use of language, and even the nudity, I really wanted that shot to be there, and I didn't want to blur it, because again, blurring it is blurring that girl's primal emotion. Then, and what is art? I don't know. So, and offending Hinduism, if Hinduism has suppressed this huge population as outcast or like unseeables, and if this religion is doing it better, you call it out, better. I mean, art is for that. And you can't say, like, you can't say something holy and you also say, like, there is a system of discrimination. So if it offensive art is also about offending and provoking, it is always not about creating happy moments. That is not how our life is, right?
Marathi's mother, Yosana's mother, suffers just as much as Yosana does, right? So why is it that she does not become a deity? Because the it's not, I won't say, I don't want to use the word logic, because this is a kind of a legend, fairy tale kind of thing. But the thing is that when you oppress somebody and you're afraid of their wrath, and the guilt overcomes you, then is it because Yosana dies that she becomes the goddess? Or is it like, I'm just curious why, because every generation of that family is a Yosana in a way. So I wanted you to just like explain that aspect to me.
Similar, who does the Veni character,
The mother, yeah.
the mother character, she somehow come to terms with her existence, and
All right.
she starts, like, within the system, and she abides by the rules, and she has somewhere accepted her existence as a quasi slave. The same with the grandmother. But this girl, like, she doesn't want to be defined by her birth, and she wants to follow her heart. So
Right.
do you have a male term for witch? You don't have. But our culture have this word called witch, because all the women who want to follow their heart and who want to, like, follow their desire are hunted and called witches. So this is very much part of a culture where a woman, if she decides to live her heart, she will be hunted. And all your stories, whatever you have in this land, as folklore, as history, it's all about witch hunting. You will find the roots of witch hunting in every story, like whether documented or not documented, you will find that.
Thank you so much, Lena, because like I said, I think, you kind of say a story without the I think the biggest strength of the film is its folkloric kind of treatment, in which you kind of lay it out and say a story, but then you don't really. It's almost like an urban horror legend kind of story, and you don't really have a message at the end or whatever it is, because people take away the entirety of it without just one small summation at the end, because I always think that these things are too large to kind of sum up with one small, like, message at the end kind of a thing. So thank you so much for the film and also for your time. All the best for your future ventures.
And my last word is, with all my films, I also invite my audience to enter into the world I create and participate in it. It's not just the film crew and the community whose stories I'm trying to depict. It is also about the audience participating in the narrative. And that's exactly why I, use this kind of film language, where it has all the openings for everyone to participate in the film. So I exactly want you to do that. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this, opportunity to express what I wanted to express. Thank you.
You're most welcome. Thank you.